the Alpha King did not execute Mira Vale. That was what the court called mercy. They said he was merciful because he did not let the guards drag her to the execution stones. They said he was merciful because he ignored the council's demand for her blood. They said he was merciful because he chained her beneath the palace instead. Mira learned that night that mercy could still burn. The silver vault lay under the oldest wing of Silvercrest Palace, below the throne room, below the moon chapel, below even the royal graves. It was a place built for monsters, or for people the kingdom needed to call monsters before it could sleep. Mira knelt in the center of the vault with silver chains locked around both wrists. The metal hissed against her skin. Every breath tasted like blood and cold stone. Above her, Alpha King Darius stood behind the iron threshold. He wore no crown, only black armor. Only the face of a man who had decided judgment was easier than doubt. Behind him stood High Priest Corvin in moon-white robes. Corvin did not look angry. That made him more dangerous. He looked calm, devout, certain, as if silver chains were not cruelty, but ritual. Darius's voice echoed through the vault. "You are accused of corrupting the moon altar, of poisoning the pack link, of worsening every curse wolf placed under your hands, of bringing the blood moon curse into my kingdom." Mira lifted her head. She had been a healer once, a quiet one. The kind summoned only when royal wolves were too dangerous for ordinary hands. She still remembered the night she saved Captain Celine's brother from tearing out his own throat. Darius had stood outside the door afterward, pale and silent, and said, "You are the only healer here who does not flinch." Now he looked at her as if that same courage had become evidence against her. "I did not create the curse," Mira said. The silver chains tightened. Darius looked at the burns on her wrists. Something moved in his jaw, but not enough. Corvin spoke softly from behind him. "Majesty, the council demanded execution. Silver containment is the only mercy left." Mira laughed once. It sounded broken. Mercy does not need chains. Darius's eyes hardened with exhaustion. 3 wolves had died that week. A noble had attacked his own mate under moonlight. A child wolf named Aaron had forgotten his mother's name and tried to claw the voice out of his head. The kingdom was bleeding panic, and panic had pointed at Mira. "Then explain why every cursed wolf you treated worsened after your hands touched them," Darius said. "Because I was pulling the curse into myself." The guards behind him shifted. Someone laughed under their breath. Darius did not. That almost hurt more. He only looked at her as if he wanted to believe her and had already chosen not to. "The moon altar contains your blood. My blood was placed there. The curse marks match your healing sigil. They were copied. Your herbs were found beside the poisoned basin because someone put them there." Corvin lowered his eyes as if grieving for her. That was when Mira understood he wanted Darius to see pity, not doubt. Darius stepped closer to the threshold. The silver ward between them flared. Mira flinched, not from fear of him, but from the pressure of the curse beneath the palace. It was moving again. A red pulse under stone. A heartbeat that was not human. Not wolf, hungry. "You have to take these chains off," she said. Darius's answer was immediate. "No. If you leave me here, it will spread. If I release you and you are lying, my people die. If you keep me chained and I am telling the truth, they die faster." For 1 second, silence filled the vault. Then a howl tore through the palace above them. Not one wolf, dozens. Darius turned toward the sound. The silver chains around Mira's wrists began to glow red. The vault trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Far above them, beyond stone and steel and all the laws men used to feel safe. The moonlight changed. White became crimson. The guards screamed first. Their eyes bled red. Their claws broke through skin. Darius looked back at Mira. For the first time that night, fear entered his face. Not fear of her, fear that he had chained the wrong person. Mira felt the curse surge upward. The chains burned deeper, and with the last strength she had, she whispered, "I was the only thing holding it back." Then the moon turned red. The sounds from above the vault told the story without witnesses. Wolves who had known their names for 30 years, calling out to empty corridors. A guard who had served 15 years beginning to growl at his own reflection. A child wolf somewhere in the upper halls who could not stop clawing at the sound in his own head. Darius stood at the vault threshold and listened to his kingdom unravel above him. Then he stepped through the silver ward. The metal burned his hands. He broke the chains himself. The lock was designed to resist wolf strength, which meant he had to use both hands and something more than strength, the deliberate commitment of a man reversing a decision while it was still possible to reverse it. The chains fell. Mira collapsed forward. He caught her before she reached the floor. She let him hold her weight for one moment. Then she steadied herself and looked up at him. She said, "You waited until the moon proved what my words could not." Darius had no answer for that. She did not wait for one. She straightened, pressed one hand against the vault wall, and began to walk toward the stairs. Her veins were dark under the skin. Not bruised, dark the way river water goes dark when something disturbs the bottom. Darius watched her walk and understood, slowly, that whatever lived inside her was not the curse. It was the curse being held. He followed her up. The wolves who had lost control in the upper halls were being separated from their pack members by palace staff who were not trained for this and were managing through force of desperation. Mira moved through the corridor without running. She placed her hands on the first wolf she reached, a guard she knew by name. A young man who had once brought her breakfast when she worked a night vigil, and she breathed the way people breathe when they are doing something that costs them. The black veins deepened. The guard went still. Then he said the guard's name, his own name, as if he had not been certain of it for the last hour. Mira moved to the next wolf and the next. Darius walked behind her and watched the moon red draining from eyes he had been afraid to look into, and he understood what he had put in a vault beneath the palace. He had chained the only person who could do this. High Priest Corvin appeared at the end of the corridor. He had exchanged his expression for grief. "The release," he said softly, "may have caused the surge." Lady Isolde was behind him, one hand pressed against the wall. Watching the wolves, Mira was stabilizing with the expression of a woman who wanted to believe anything that made the situation orderly again. "We cannot know the curse hasn't spread further," Isolde said. "The council will support emergency containment." "No," Darius said. Something in his voice stopped them both. He had not raised it. He had only said the word with the particular certainty of a man who had been wrong and knew the shape of the wrong now and was not going to step into it a second time. Corvin's calm did not waver. That, Mira noticed from the end of the corridor, was worth remembering. A man whose plan had been interrupted should have shown something. Corvin showed nothing except patience. Healer Rowan found them an hour later in the infirmary. He was an older man with the kind of face that had absorbed a great deal of the world's difficulty and had decided the best response was to simply continue. He examined Mira's wrists and did not speak for some time. Then he said what Darius needed to hear. and what Mira had already known and had not been allowed to say. She was a Moonwell Healer, a rare line, one who could draw corruption from other wolves and hold it inside her own blood. Not permanently, long enough for the source to be found, long enough for healing to happen. The wolves worsened after her treatments because the curse reacted when she pulled it away from their bonds. To everyone watching, it had looked like she was causing the symptoms. In truth, she had been absorbing the poison. The black veins under her skin were not infection. They were the cost of work that looked like damage. Rowan said all of this to Darius in the flat, careful tone of a healer who had decided that accuracy mattered more than diplomacy. Then he turned to Mira. He said, "I taught you to hide the wound healing left in you. Then they used the hidden wound as proof you were guilty." Mira looked at him. She remembered being 9 years old, standing in this man's workroom, watching him press cloth against the dark veins on her forearms, after she had pulled a fever from a patient who would otherwise have died. She remembered watching another healer from her line dragged through the palace corridors, accused of curse sympathy, hands bound in white cloth so no one would have to see what healing had cost her. She remembered Rowan's voice, very quiet. "Never let them see what you carry." She had carried it alone for 15 years, and they had still found a way to call it evidence. Darius came to her chamber that evening. He stood in the doorway and asked if she would allow him to speak. She told him the door was not her wall to close. He apologized. He said he had believed evidence he should have questioned. He said he had chosen the appearance of mercy over the work of truth. He said he was sorry. Mira listened to all of it. Then she said, "You chained me in public. You doubted me in law. You burned my name where everyone could see. Do not whisper regret like it is justice." Darius stood in the doorway for a moment. He nodded once. He left. It was the correct response. She noted it without forgiving it. The investigation required 4 people: Mira, Rowan, Darius, and Captain Celine. Celine had escorted Mira to the vault. She had locked the chains herself. She had followed orders, which she would spend the next several weeks not quite knowing how to put down. She had been a guard captain for 9 years. She had followed difficult orders before. None of them had left burn marks on someone else's wrists. She began with the vault logs and the Moon Chapel logs, which should have agreed with each other about when the altar had been accessed. They did not. Someone had adjusted a timestamp on the chapel record. Mira had been in the healing wing, treating 3 patients at the time the record claimed she was at the altar. The patients were verifiable. Their names were in Mira's healing log. Their testimony was available. None of this had been checked before the chains were locked. Celine brought the records without announcing what they meant. She set them on the table where Mara and Darius were working and said, "Someone inside the ritual hierarchy changed this." She did not say, "I am sorry for chaining you." She did not have the language for it yet. But she set the records down with both hands, which was as close as she could get. It was enough for now. Rowan spent the same day tracing the curse marks back through 6 weeks of healer documentation. He found that the wolves Mira had treated showed a specific pattern. They worsened in the first days after her care, then stabilized, then were later reinfected by something external. The second infection had a different signature. It moved outward from the pack link rather than inward from individual wolves. It looked like someone had taken a healed patient and reopened the wound deliberately. There was only one reason to reinfect healed wolves: to make Mira's healing look like harm. To make the chart of her work read as a record of destruction rather than containment, Rowan brought this to Mira with the expression of a healer who had connected what he was seeing to something he should have named earlier. The reinfections happened at night, he said. After chapel rounds, when priests have unrestricted access to the healing wing. Mira looked at the documented timeline. Then she said, "How long have the wolves been getting worse?" Rowan answered without checking his notes. 6 weeks before your arrest. How long has Corvin been pressing the council for emergency authority? Rowan was quiet. 8 weeks, he said. The investigation had its shape. It did not yet have proof. Proof required the inverted sigil, the blood basin, the altered logs, the reinfection timeline, and something no document could provide. Erin, speaking her name in the middle of a red moon pulse without attacking her. They gathered the documents first. They gathered Erin's testimony last. It was the smallest piece of evidence. It was also the one no court could argue with. A boy who had forgotten his own name for 11 days, looking at Mira across a room full of people who had called her the cause of his forgetting and saying, "She pulled the red out." Erin was the proof that did not arrive as documentation. He was 16, slight, with the specific pallor of someone who had spent weeks losing control of himself in increments. He had been the wolf everyone pointed to when they wanted to explain what Mira had done. Mira walked into his room during a red moon pulse when the pressure in the pack link made it difficult for recovering wolves to hold their identities. Everyone else in the corridor took a step back when the pulse hit. Erin's eyes went blood red. His claws extended. The healer who had been watching him scrambled toward the door. Mira stepped forward. She said his name. Erin's head snapped toward her. The red in his eyes did not vanish, but he stopped. He looked at her. He said, "From somewhere under the red." She pulled the red out. The words were simple. Mira thought they might be the most important words spoken in this palace in a very long time. 2 days later, Darius told her he wanted to keep the investigation private until they had proof. He said panic would spread if the kingdom learned a high priest might be involved. He said he needed time. Mira looked at him. She said, "You condemned me in front of them. You do not get to believe me in secret." Darius was quiet for a moment. "The panic was already there," she said. "You built it by giving them someone to blame without evidence. I will not be the thing you trust only in rooms with closed doors." He heard her. She could tell he heard her because the argument he was forming did not continue. He nodded. He began to think about how to be public. The inverted sigil was the discovery that changed the shape of the investigation. Mira had been studying the curse marks left on wolves she had not treated, marks she could not have created, marks that had appeared in the days before her arrest. They used her healing sigil, but something was wrong with them. The movement of the symbols was reversed. Her sigil drew corruption inward. These marks expelled corruption outward in a spiral pattern that fed back into the pack link. Only someone trained in priesthood moonscript could have inverted her sigil with this precision. Mira set the traced mark on the table. She looked at Darius. Someone inside the highest levels of moon ritual did this. Darius said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Corvin has been head of moon rites for 11 years. They did not say it aloud, but the room held the shape of what had been said. Corvin moved before they were ready. He brought the blood moon crisis before the council with the language of emergency. He said the pack link was deteriorating. He said wolves were no longer safe in their own homes. He said the Alpha King was emotionally compromised by his relationship with a curse-bearer. He said the priesthood had both the authority and the ability to manage cursed wolves, and that Moon Emergency Authority must be invoked before the kingdom lost what remained of its stability. Lady Isolde supported it. She said, the council wanted certainty. She did not use those exact words. She said she was concerned about public safety. But what she meant was, we wanted a guilty person, and the absence of one frightens us. Darius refused the emergency authority. Corvin accepted the refusal with patience. That patience was the most frightening thing in the room. Mira made her mistake on the 4th night after her release. She felt the curse building toward another surge, the specific pressure of it, which she recognized the way a person recognizes the sound of something they have heard before in the dark. She did not tell Darius. She did not want to slow the investigation by requiring protection she had not asked for. She found a quiet corridor and began drawing the corruption into herself. She got too much, the curse whispered in Darius's voice. It said, "He will chain you again." She knew it was not him. She knew the curse found familiar voices because familiar voices moved faster through fear. She knew all of this. She still heard it in his voice. She still almost turned and attacked the figure at the end of the corridor, which was Celine, who had been following her out of concern she had not quite admitted to herself. Mira stopped. She stopped because she chose to stop, not because the curse stopped, because she recognized the choice in time. Celine did not move. They looked at each other. Mira sat down on the corridor floor and pressed her back against the wall and said, "I need someone to keep saying my name until it comes back." Celine sat down across from her and said her name, Mira. Mira Vale, healer, alive. It took 11 minutes. Darius found her afterward. He did not touch her. He crouched outside her reach and looked at her with the expression of a man who understood that what he wanted to do and what she needed were probably not the same thing. He had been a king for 6 years. He had spent most of that time learning that authority was useful for many things and almost useless for this one thing, which was making someone trust him again after he had broken trust in a vault with silver chains. He said, "What do you need me to do?" She said, "Do not decide before I answer." He waited. She did not speak immediately. She was choosing carefully. The old habit of a healer from a feared line, who had learned to want only what was reasonable, who had learned to make herself small, so she would not be made smaller by someone else. She decided to want what she actually needed. She said she needed him to anchor her to speak Alpha Command into the pack link at a frequency that would let her vent the curse without it attaching to anyone nearby. She said she needed his voice to be certain, not gentle, certain. She told him the words. He said them exactly as she gave them, not his version, not the version he thought would be better. The curse vented. Her veins cleared to their normal color for the first time in days. She exhaled. It was not gratitude, but it was the beginning of something that trusted his restraint. The basin beneath the moon altar held everything. Stolen blood in a sealed vessel with Mira's name scratched into the wax. Priesthood ash arranged in the inverted spiral she had traced on parchment. Broken wolf name tokens, the small carved pieces wolf families kept to anchor an identity during illness snapped in half and buried under the altar stone. Pieces of silver chain, and at the center, sealed in old ritual wax, the broken form of a royal judgment seal, Darius's order. The one that had chained Mira. Mira looked at it for a long time, she said. The curse feeds on false judgment. Your order did not create it. She picked up the seal, but he used it to strengthen it. Darius looked at the seal in her hand. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they did that cannot be undone. When they are still in the part of the reckoning where they have not yet accepted the full weight of it, she understood what it cost him to see it there. She did not soften the cost. He needed to carry it. She set the seal back in the basin. We document this, she said, every piece, with witnesses, before we move. Darius looked at her. You mean before Corvin can claim we planted it? Yes, he understood. The evidence was only useful if it could not be turned back against them. They spent 4 hours documenting the basin with 3 independent witnesses and a court recorder who had been loyal to Darius's father and had never been part of the priesthood's network. Corvin was not present. That was the last time they had the advantage of his absence. 3 days later, he moved. He brought the blood moon crisis before the council with the language of emergency. He said the pack link was deteriorating beyond healer management. He said wolves were no longer safe in their own homes. He said the Alpha King was emotionally compromised by his attachment to a woman accused of curse-bearing. He said the priesthood had both the authority and the capacity to manage what remained, and that Moon Emergency Authority must be invoked before the kingdom lost its last coherent structure. He presented a document, an Emergency Authority request, detailed, complete, ready to be signed. Celine, sitting in the back of the council chamber, noticed the date on the document. She noted it and said nothing until the session ended. Then she brought it to Mira. The document had been drafted 3 days before the Red Moon event it was supposedly responding to. Corvin had written the solution before he had triggered the crisis. That was the last piece. The court was full. Every frightened face Silvercrest had produced was in that room, and they were all looking for something to believe. Corvin had prepared the room carefully. The cursed wolves stood in a ring around the central altar, arranged to look like patients in a sanctified infirmary rather than people about to be bound. The council had been seated where there was no easy path to the door. The pack representatives had been placed where they could see the wolves clearly, where fear would do most of the work before Corvin had to name anyone. The altered signet was visible at his breast. The blood basin sat beneath the altar cloth, covered, waiting. He stood at the head of the altar in full moon ceremony robes, with the calm of a man who had been rehearsing this moment for months and did not expect to be interrupted. He announced that only priesthood purification could save what remained of the pack. He said the Alpha King had failed. He said the healer had cursed them all. He said the moon had spoken, and the only mercy remaining was to place unstable wolves under sacred protection. What he meant was, under his command. The moon above the chapel was already shifting toward red. Darius moved to step in front of Mira, then stopped. He remembered. He moved to stand beside her. Mira walked into the room first. Her wrists were visible. The burn scars from the silver chains were visible. She did not cover them. She had covered enough. Now the scars could speak. She said to the court, not to Corvin, "You called me the curse because it was easier than asking what I was carrying." She looked at the faces that had watched her be chained. "I carried the corruption you could not look at, and I carried it in chains your fear built." Corvin began the invocation. The blood basin beneath the altar activated. The moon went red. Darius felt it in his bones. The Alpha command pathway inside him twisting into violence, the pack link pulling toward fear, the cursed trying to use his authority to repeat its first success. He had chained Mira once. The curse knew he could be made to do it again, he said, into the silence of everything the room was afraid to hear. I chained Mira Vale without truth. His voice carried the way alpha voices carried. Not because he raised it, but because it was the kind of statement that changed the acoustic quality of a room. I called fear mercy. I gave judgment where investigation was owed. The order was false. He reached into his coat and removed the broken judgment seal. He snapped it in two. The curse recoiled. Not ended, but wounded. Corvin's invocation lost its anchor. The wolves in the ritual circle shook their heads as if emerging from water. Aaron looked up. He looked around the room. He said his own name. Quietly, as if he was checking that it was still there. Then he said, she pulled the red out. Mira was already moving. She walked into the ritual circle without being asked. She placed her hands on the Packlink node at the center, the old silver basin that Corvin had been using to feed the curse. And she breathed the way she had always breathed, the way Rowan had taught her, the way that cost everything and built nothing visible for anyone watching. But this time Rowan was beside her, and Celine was holding the perimeter, and Darius was anchoring the Alpha command pathway without touching her, without directing her, without claiming her gift as his instrument. The cursed wolves spoke their names, one by one, into the red-lit room. Aaron, Hallen, Torvin. The young mother who had not known her daughter's voice for 11 days, each name a thread pulled back from the wrong place, each name a refusal. The red moon faded, not immediately, gradually, the way light actually changes. Corvin ordered Celine to seize Mira. Celine looked at Mira's burned wrists. She looked at the chains Darius had broken 6 days ago. She looked at the court. She lowered her weapon. She said, I chained one innocent woman because I followed fear. I will not do it twice. She turned to the priests behind Corvin. She told them, in the flat voice of a captain who had decided which orders she would follow, that they were not leaving the chapel. Corvin had prepared for many possibilities. He had not prepared for the palace guard refusing him. The evidence was already in the room, the inverted sigil, documented and verified. The altered guard logs Celine had recovered, the stolen blood, the priesthood ash, the broken wolf name tokens, the basin. The draft of the emergency authority request, written in Corvin's own hand, dated 3 days before the Red Moon event it was supposedly responding to, and Aaron, standing in the middle of the ritual circle, saying her name, Mira, because she had been there, because she had pulled the red out when she had no reason to, except that wolves were suffering, and she was the only person in the palace who could. Corvin said, in the last voice of a man who still believed his plan, that only the priesthood could control the curse. He looked at the court with the calm of someone who had been right about frightened people before. You would hand these wolves back to a healer who cannot keep darkness from her own blood, he said. You would call what lives in her veins healing. He looked at the evidence on the table. Ford or real, fear still needs someone to govern it. At least under the priesthood, it obeys. Mira said, you did not control the curse. You taught it where to feed. Celine arrested him. The moon went silver. Darius found her in the moon chapel an hour after the last cursed wolf had been stabilized. She was sitting on the floor of the chapel, which was not where a healer who had just saved a kingdom's packlink might be expected to sit, but was perhaps exactly where a person who was very tired would end up. He stood at the door. He said, I thought breaking the chains would be the moment I saved you, she said. No, That was the moment you stopped making it worse. He accepted it. He sat down at the other end of the chapel, at enough distance to be present without claiming the space. He did not ask for forgiveness. He had enough sense left to understand that forgiveness was not what this moment required. He asked if he may sit beside her. She looked at the distance between them. She said, "Not yet." He stayed where he was. He did not argue. That mattered more than apology. That was the beginning of something. Not trust, the precondition for trust. It was smaller than forgiveness. But for the first time since the vault, smaller did not feel meaningless. In the morning, Darius stood before the palace. Not the council chamber. Not the small room where important decisions were made in quiet. The courtyard where the pack could hear. He said Mira Vale had been falsely accused. He said she had been chained without trial under a law that did not require truth before imprisonment. He said she had contained the Blood Moon curse at cost to herself while the kingdom burned her name. He said her name had been burned publicly. He was restoring it publicly. He did not ask her to stand beside him. She was there because she chose to be. She stood at the edge of the courtyard and listened to him say, without softening, without political language, without the particular grammar that powerful people use to admit mistakes while not quite admitting them. I was wrong. The system that let me be wrong must change. Then Mira stepped forward. She held the broken silver chain link in one hand. She touched the burn scars on her wrists. She said, "No silver containment without trial." She looked at the place where her voice had been ignored. Accused testimony before imprisonment. She turned to Rowan, who had spent a sleepless night preparing to speak in public for the first time in 30 years. Independent Healer Review. The accused cannot be judged by the people with a claim against them. She looked at Corvin's empty position in the court. Priesthood evidence must be verified by outside witnesses. Sacred office is not proof. She looked at the frightened wolves in the crowd. Emergency powers must be time-limited. Fear expands authority too easily. She placed the broken silver link on the council table. All curse cases must be publicly logged. Hidden procedures hide abuse. She said the last thing. If a name is burned in public, it must be restored in public. She looked at Darius. Private apology cannot repair public shame. Darius signed the reforms before the pack. Lady Isolde stepped forward, she said, in the voice of a council speaker who had decided that accuracy mattered more than comfort. We wanted a guilty woman because fear is easier to govern than uncertainty. We were wrong. I was wrong. She added her seal to the document. 6 months later, during a new trial for a healer accused of worsening a minor surge, the old instinct rose in the room. The frightened voices, the need to name a cause. The particular speed at which a crowd moves towards someone they have already decided to blame. It rose and moved through the room the way fear always moves, faster than truth, louder than evidence, with the specific confidence of something that has been practiced many times. Mira entered the room. Darius was already there, and he did not speak first. He looked at the accused healer. He looked at Mira. He waited. Mira asked, "What were you carrying?" The healer showed blackened veins on both forearms, the veins that looked like damage, the veins that were the cost of work. The room understood. No chains were brought. An independent healer council reviewed the evidence. The accused healer was asked to testify. The moon above the palace remained silver. It stayed that way. Not because the danger had been removed. Because the system had finally stopped creating it.